2020 is over, and due to the pandemic, not much new movies came out, and that's why it was difficult for me to pick my top 5 best movies of the year. But let me tell you, it was so easy to pick my top 5 worst. So strap in, I have a big beef with the movies on this list, and you are about to find out why. Number 5, Freaky. Now, the director of this movie directed the 2 Happy Death Day films, and I loved how he took a concept from a classic comedy movie, Groundhog Day, and applied a horror spin to it. And it resulted in a really fun movie, one that got a really high score from me. So when I heard that he was going to take the Freaky Friday concept and apply a horror spin on that, I was really pumped. But then I saw the movie, and I actually thought it was so bad, I couldn't believe it. Now, the opening scene of the movie had a fun scene with some really brutal deaths, but right after that, we are taken to a high school, and every trope in the book is used here. And it is so textbook and so lazily done that you'd think the director stopped caring after he did the opening scene. There were also some scenes where the boyfriend is talking to the main character while she's in the body of the serial killer, and they have some romantic conversations, and I don't know what the movie was trying to do, but the scene was just so incredibly uncomfortable and awkward. I was actually cringing when watching it, and there were times when I was watching this movie where I genuinely thought it was directed by a horny pervert. Like, I was genuinely frightened by this director and his weird fantasy of seeing a high school boy make out with an adult Vince Vaughn. Yep, a minor making out with a murderous serial killer. That's supposed to be this movie's attempt at comedy. You laughing yet? There was not a single character I liked in this movie. The friend was generic, I hated the cop's sister, I hated the mother, the teacher was just downright evil, the guys on the football teams are rapists to girls and boys, and the gay friend at the beginning of the movie said something about the death of some students so gleefully that I immediately had a strong hatred towards him. And I thought this was the movie's way of saying that he was going to be the first one to die, but then you find out that he is one of the main side characters who has lots of screen time. And then he starts screaming and just being the loud and unfunny, obnoxious comic relief. Even the main girl, I like the actress that plays her, as I thought she did a good job in Paranormal Activity 4 and Detective Pikachu, but the character is supposed to be this unpopular nerd that everyone else makes fun of. But before the girls started making fun of her, I actually thought to myself, she's actually prettier than all the other girls in this school. And right after I thought that, she was being made fun of about her fashion sense. Even though the only thing that she doesn't have is her hair combed, the movie expects you to believe that she's unpopular and the subject of ridicule. I mean, come on, seriously. This felt like such an ancient Hollywood tactic, and I'm surprised that the director thought that this was acceptable. This is what I meant when I said this movie uses every old and dated high school trope. Especially when you take into account that he did the high school thing so well on Happy Death Day. This movie also has 2 endings, and the second one genuinely didn't even need to be there. It was just tacked on, and the movie really felt like it was overstaying its welcome. This is also the first time the director gets to give his movie an R rating, and due to the fact that everything about this movie doesn't work, the R rating is ultimately pointless. You get some cool looking deaths, but that's about all this movie has going for it. And how does this dirty criminal who lives in this crap hole all of a sudden get a fashion sense? And when the mother hears her daughter say one-word sentences like school, friends, the very next day after she was attacked, then you send her to the hospital, you don't just let her go to school. The writing in this movie was just so bad, and it was so predictable. I hate this movie. If you really want to see it, then just save yourself some time and skip to all of the death scenes where you see all of these horrible characters die, and then you'll be set. Number 4. The Witches. I have made a whole versus video as to why this movie sucks, so I'm going to keep this brief. Despite having some great names attached to it, such as Robert Zemeckis and Guillermo del Toro, this movie just came off as laughable as opposed to scary or creepy. The new slant they put on the story makes no sense, the special effects pale in comparison to the creative practical effects in the 90s movie, and the acting just felt off. This is a movie that could have had a lot of potential, but in the end it just turned out to be another wasted opportunity. And it shows that kids movies are never going to have the balls that they used to. It had a couple of neat ideas, but not enough to justify its existence. This is a terrible movie, and I am so disappointed to see a film that could have been good fun end up being totally worthless in the end. Number 3. Birds of Prey. This is a movie that I honestly feel has gotten worse over time. First off, this movie was a complete ripoff of Deadpool, even down to the word-for-word ripoff in the end credits.
You're still here. Oh, but I can tell you one thing, and it's a bit of a secret.
Are you dummies still sitting there? Fine. Since you stuck it out this long, I'll tell you a super duper secret.
Harley Quinn also narrates the whole entire film, and in Deadpool this works because he narrates very select parts of the film, but Harley does it so much that I just started to get annoyed. I so badly wanted her to stop narrating and just let the scene play out visually through the dialogue of the characters as you would expect from a movie, but she kept going. The only thing this movie had going for it was Margot Robbie's performance as Harley Quinn and a couple of the action scenes. Now, most of the action in this movie is lame, but there were 2 action scenes that I thought thought were very well done. Now the reason these action scenes stand out so much from the rest is because they were choreographed by the John Wick director Chad Stahelski, and they are miles ahead of the rest of the action in the movie. Now the biggest offender is what they did to Black Mask. This is not Black Mask. This is just a gay guy who hates women. Nothing about him is like the intimidating and serious mob boss that he is in the comics. He is just a pathetic walking cartoon, and apparently the movie went to the Last Airbender school of name pronunciations, as they keep calling him Roman Sionis. It's Sionis, Roman Sionis.
Get it right!
What they did to this character was unforgivable, as he bears no resemblance to the original character at all. And all the men in this movie are misogynist assholes. All of them are pricks, with the exception of maybe one or two throwaway characters. And even they end up to be bad people in the end. And as much as the movie wants you to think that these are strong women, you're just sitting there thinking, these aren't strong women. If they were, then the movie would make them go up against men that were equally competent in their own regard. But they are just made out to be perverted idiots. And why are they trying to make this a motivational girl power movie? Harley Quinn is still supposed to be a villain. You can't try to push your female empowerment agenda in a movie about a villain, but they tried, and this movie bombed big time. And in comparison, Joker, which was not pandering to SJWs, was the first R-rated movie to surpass $1 billion, and it won 2 Oscars the same week that Birds of Prey disappointed at the box office. And this is the first time that a studio was so concerned about their movie that they even changed the title while it was still in cinemas from Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn to Harley Quinn Birds of Prey. And this movie also squandered its R rating. I swear when I first saw the movie I initially thought it was more violent than it was, but when I watched it again at home, it was practically bloodless. And by the way, my sisters watched the movie and they hated it even more than I did, and even they saw it as an inferior movie to Deadpool. So all round, I don't ever want to see this movie again. It frustrates me seeing how they are using these characters to preach more heavy-handed gender politics as opposed to telling a good story with well-developed characters. And the fact that this movie screwed up with characters that I really like, well, that's why it takes a high spot on this list. Screw this movie. Number 2. Mulan. Talk about the very definition of number 2. I have made 2 versus videos comparing this to the 1998 Disney animated classic and the live action movie from 2009, so if you want to know my in-depth thoughts of this movie, then check those videos out. But yeah, this was another film that showcases how Disney's animated films are just so much better, and everything that made those animated movies so great and memorable and meaningful is completely lost in these live action remakes. And Mulan is no different. And this one, out of all the live action Disney remakes, had the most potential to be something different in live action. But for the sake of false female empowerment, among many other things, they completely squandered their chance. And this movie was so close to becoming my number 1 worst film of the year. But then I remembered seeing another movie in 2020, one that was so bad and had absolutely no redeeming value that I decided no, this other film is actually worse than the live action Mulan, both as an adaptation of its original source material and as a movie. And the worst movie of 2020 is Artemis Fowl. The reason this movie is number 1 on the list is because it gets everything wrong. This movie is terrible to fans who have read the books as well as people who have not read the books. So by that metric, it fails at impressing anyone. Artemis Fowl is a series of books which I have not read, but what intrigued me about them is that aside from this fantasy world that it's based in, the title character is not the protagonist of the story, he is actually the antagonist. He's a villain and is actually very complicated. That's the concept behind Artemis Fowl as a character, which for a book series aimed towards kids and teens is actually pretty darn ingenious. In the movie, however, they just turn the whole story into a Spy Kids kind of narrative, and most insultingly, they turn Artemis Fowl from a villain into a hero. And for some reason, they still have him proclaim that he is a criminal mastermind, even though in this version, he is not. Like I said, he's the hero. What follows is just a confused mess of a film. The story is a mess, the structure is a mess, the dialogue scenes are a mess, the action scenes are a mess, the CGI, dear god, it doesn't even look finished. It genuinely feels like you are watching a work print of the movie and not the final film, and for some reason, Disney was still going to shit this out into theaters and charge you to see it. This film was so bad that I was actually going to make a video talking about how bad it was, but after I saw it, I was just so overwhelmed with everything the movie did wrong that I just gave up on it because my video would just never end. And what makes this all the more shocking is that it was directed by Kenneth Branagh. He is a very talented director, and for him to come out with this, it makes me wonder just what kind of studio interference was going on with him and Disney. I don't know why Disney would interfere with his directing, because you'd think that they would have confidence in hiring a director like him, but whatever happened, the movie ended up being a complete disaster. Not one thing about this movie was even okay. It was all terrible. Even the acting felt off. Now, I don't blame most of the actors, as in a lot of cases, these are just kids, and kids especially need good directors to guide their performance. But for whatever reason, no one got a good director here. As bad as the other movies on this list are, at least Freaky had some good deaths. At least Birds of Prey had 2 decent action scenes. At least The Witches had an interesting idea or 2. At least even Mulan had a couple of scenes with the reflection music. But Artemis Fowl had no redeemable qualities about it at all. It is shocking that a movie like this got made, and it's even more shocking that they were planning on releasing this unfinished and insulting piece of crap in cinemas. The fact that they even tried to release this in cinemas is absolutely criminal. And yeah, 2 of Disney's movies have taken the top 2 spots of my worst movies of the year list. Let that sink in. So, those are my top 5 worst movies of the year. Trust me, I had plenty more bad movies that I could have added to this list, such as Scoob and Brahms the Boy 2, and I was even thinking of putting Enola Holmes on there, but a lot of those would end up on my top 10 list of worst movies of the year, because no one had expectations for those films, but the movies on my top 5 list, it's fair to say that these had a lot more anticipation behind them. And there is one other movie that I thought about putting on this list, but I decided against it. You will find out which movie that is soon. So, thank you very much as always for watching, guys. Feel free to donate to me via Patreon, and if my Patreon gets 100 backers, even if they're just $1 pledges, then I'm going to make a video that a lot of you requested that I make, but due to copyright reasons, I never did. And that will be a 3-way versus video of the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy. I gave up on the idea of this video because it would get copyright claim to oblivion if I made it the way I wanted it to be made, even though it would fall within fair use. But if I reach 100 donations on Patreon, then I will bite the bullet and go full speed ahead on making the video. And believe me, I had this versus video planned when How to Train Your Dragon 3 was released, and I almost finished writing it, and it actually had the potential of being my most favourite versus video. And I was very disappointed that for the sake of my livelihood on YouTube, I had to cancel it. I was also afraid what it might do to my channel. So feel free to donate to me on Patreon, and when we hit that milestone, I will get straight to making the video, and we'll see what happens. Thank you very much as always for watching, guys, and I will see all of you next time. Take care.